27 October, 1940 Ningbo, Zhejiang Province, China. Air raid logs from Ningbo's Civil Defense Office record a brief alarm. One Japanese aircraft over the Kaiming Street district, unusual because witnesses later described no explosions, only grain and cloth scraps falling from the sky. In the weeks that follow, municipal health reports note a sudden rise in suspected plague cases in neighborhoods directly beneath the flight path. By the time the outbreak is contained, local authorities register around 1,500 civilian deaths, in a city that had not recently reported an epidemic of that scale. Post-war Chinese investigations, combined with Japanese medical publications, identify the incident as a deliberate biological attack conducted by Unit 731 in cooperation with Unit 1644, using infected vectors dispersed from the aircraft. At the time, the event remains a local catastrophe with no wider consequences. 5 years later, the internal records from Ningbo and similar operations will be quietly assessed by United States military intelligence as invaluable wartime data, worth granting immunity to the men who organized them. The copy of the Geneva Protocol lies in an in-tray at Japan's Foreign Ministry in the spring of 1925. The document, signed by 17 nations in Geneva, prohibits the use of chemical and bacteriological weapons in warfare. Japan signs the protocol on May 10, 1925, but domestically the agreement is never ratified with binding enforcement measures. The text remains an international gesture, not a legal constraint. At the Imperial Japanese Army Medical School in Tokyo, a group of physician officers studies foreign military medical research. They review reports from the European front of the First World War, where chemical weapons caused over 1 million casualties. They note that while chemical agents require industrial production capacity Japan lacks, biological agents could be cultivated at relatively low cost. A memo circulated among staff officers in 1926 suggests that microbial warfare could provide what one writer calls a force multiplier, low material investment, high potential impact on enemy forces and civilian infrastructure. Among these officers is Shiro Ishii, a microbiologist trained at Kyoto Imperial University. In 1928, Ishii travels to Europe and North America on an official study tour, visiting laboratories and universities in Germany, France, and the United States. Upon his return, he submits a detailed report arguing that biological weapons could offer Japan strategic advantages against larger, industrially superior opponents. He emphasizes that international prohibitions against such weapons prove their effectiveness. Nations fear what they cannot defend against. The Mukden incident of September 18, 1931 changes the strategic landscape. After the staged explosion on the South Manchuria Railway, the Japanese army launches a full-scale invasion of Manchuria. Within 5 months, the region is reorganized as the puppet state of Manchukuo. The new territory offers the army effective control over an area of 1.3 million square kilometers with minimal international oversight. Staff planning documents from 1932 show a new category of installations appearing on Manchukuo administrative maps. Facilities designated for epidemic prevention and water purification. The terminology provides bureaucratic cover. Budget requests filed through the Guangdong Army list funding for medical research stations, but the proposed staffing levels and security measures far exceed those of conventional field hospitals or public health offices. In the spring of 1932, construction begins on the first experimental facility at Zhongma, approximately 100 kilometers south of Harbin. The site, officially designated the Togo Unit, occupies several buildings within a walled compound. Records from the Khabarovsk war crimes trial of 1949 include testimony describing the facility's dual purpose. Research on infectious diseases and experimentation on human subjects, primarily Chinese civilians and suspected resistance members detained by the Kempeitai military police. The Zhongma facility operates for 4 years. In the summer of 1936, a security incident, prisoner escapes and local rumors reaching nearby villages convinces headquarters that the operation requires better isolation. Staff officers draft plans for a purpose-built complex on a larger scale, located farther from populated areas but still accessible by rail. Land acquisition papers filed in Manchukuo in August 1936 describe a site near Pingfang, approximately 24 kilometers south of Harbin. The planned facility covers nearly 1 square kilometer. Engineering specifications call for perimeter walls, barracks, laboratories, a dedicated power plant, crematoria, and holding cells with reinforced security. The budget request totals several million yen, equivalent to the cost of constructing a major military airfield. Construction proceeds rapidly. By late 1936, the first buildings are operational. The unit receives its official designation, the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Guangdong Army. Internally and in post-war documentation, it becomes known as Unit 731, a numerical code derived from its postal box address. Ishii is promoted to the rank of full colonel and assumes command. Organizational charts filed with Guangdong Army headquarters show the unit divided into 8 divisions: bacterial research, experimental pathology, water purification, production of biological agents, education and training, general affairs, medical treatment for Japanese personnel, and a special equipment section. Each division operates semi-independently but reports through a unified command structure directly to the Guangdong Army Chief of Staff. Personnel rosters indicate the unit grows to approximately 3,000 staff by 1939. This includes commissioned medical officers, non-commissioned technicians, enlisted soldiers assigned to guard and logistics duties, and civilian employees from Manchukuo. Post-war reconstructions identify at least 75 doctors and researchers with advanced degrees working at Pingfang during the facility's operational lifespan. A logistics report from 1938 lists monthly supply deliveries: laboratory glassware, culture media, animal feed for breeding colonies of rats and fleas, refrigeration equipment, surgical instruments, and disinfectants. The quantities exceed the needs of a conventional military hospital by an order of magnitude. A separate procurement category, labeled Special Materials, is not itemized in surviving documents but corresponds in timing to reports of prisoner transports arriving at the facility. The cover designation, Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification, provides administrative camouflage. Budget allocations, building permits, and personnel transfers move through normal military channels without attracting scrutiny. Regional authorities in Manchukuo accept the explanation that the facility supports public health in the newly established state. Few outside the unit know its actual purpose. By the end of 1938, the physical infrastructure at Pingfang is complete. The compound includes more than 150 buildings. A narrow-gauge railway connects the site to the main Harbin-Changchun line. Guard towers overlook the perimeter. Inside, the largest structure, Building 7, houses holding cells in the basement, laboratories on the ground floor, and administrative offices above. Survivors of Unit 731 who testify at post-war trials refer to Building 7 as the center of human experimentation. Prisoner sources and processing procedures are reconstructed from trial testimony. The Kempitai delivers detainees accused of anti-Japanese activity, espionage, or banditry. Many are Chinese civilians from areas under Japanese occupation. Smaller numbers include Soviet citizens captured along the Manchukuo-Soviet border, Koreans accused of resistance, and Mongolians. After 1941, some Allied prisoners of war, British, American, and Australian personnel, are also transferred to Unit 731, though exact numbers remain disputed. Detainees are classified internally by code rather than name. Trial testimony uses the term logs to describe prisoners, a reference drawn from the euphemism used by staff to avoid explicit terminology in written records. A quartermaster's report from 1939 lists provisions for special inmates, including rations, clothing, and disinfectants, indicating a stable population maintained over time within the facility. Estimates of the total number of prisoners who die at Pingfang vary widely. Conservative scholarly reconstructions, based on cross-referencing trial testimony with surviving logistics records, place the figure between 3,000 and 5,000 individuals over the program's lifespan. Former Unit 731 personnel who speak publicly after the war, including some defendants at Khabarovsk, suggest higher totals, possibly exceeding 10,000 across all associated facilities. Precise numbers cannot be confirmed due to deliberate document destruction in August 1945. The nature of the work conducted at Pingfang is documented in trial records and post-war medical publications. Experiments focus on infectious disease transmission, environmental tolerance limits, and the effects of untreated injuries. Specific categories, as listed in Khabarovsk trial summaries, include studies on frostbite, dehydration, air pressure variation, and the progression of diseases such as plague, cholera, typhoid, anthrax, and gas gangrene. The stated objective, according to internal memos introduced at trial, is to obtain data on human physiological responses under controlled conditions, data that cannot be ethically gathered from voluntary subjects. No medical care is provided to subjects after experimentation. Survival rates in many test protocols approach zero. Deceased prisoners are cremated on site. Ashes are disposed of in unmarked areas within the compound or scattered in nearby rivers. No grave markers or registries are maintained, preventing post-war identification of victims. By 1939, Unit 731 has accumulated extensive mortality tables, dose-response curves, and environmental tolerance data. Quarterly reports submitted to Guangdong Army Headquarters describe progress in technical development and capacity expansion without detailing the human source of the information. Staff meetings recorded in post-war testimony discuss transitioning from laboratory research to field application, turning data into operational weapons. The final sentence in a surviving 1939 logistics summary, introduced at Khabarovsk, reads, "Preparation phase complete. Operational testing authorized. The next chapter in the unit's history will move from the sealed compound at Pingfang to open-air trials over Chinese cities." Procurement orders filed through Guangdong Army supply channels in early 1939 show a significant shift. Requests for ceramic bomb casings, specialized detonators, parachute canisters, and aircraft mounting hardware increase sharply. The items are not standard ordnance. Engineering specifications describe fragile containers designed to rupture at low altitude, dispersing contents without fire or explosive force, requirements consistent with biological payload delivery. Production targets appear in internal planning documents. Unit 731 aims to cultivate pathogens in batch quantities measured in kilograms per month. A memo from 1940, referenced in trial testimony, sets monthly production goals: 8 kilograms of plague bacteria, 10 kilograms of typhoid cultures, 5 kilograms of cholera. These figures represent industrial-scale microbiology, far beyond laboratory research. Storage becomes a technical challenge. Biological agents degrade rapidly under normal conditions. Engineers at Pingfang develop refrigerated transport containers and design ceramic bombs with insulated cores to protect contents during flight. A technical manual fragment, recovered post-war, describes optimal dispersal altitudes and weather conditions for maximizing agent survival and spread after release. Parallel to production efforts, the Army establishes additional units in occupied China. In 1939, Unit 1644 is activated in Nanjing under the Central China Expeditionary Army. The unit, commanded by Major General Masuda Tomosa, occupies a compound near Zhongshan Gate. Its structure mirrors Pingfang: laboratories, holding facilities, and a crematorium. Personnel rosters indicate approximately 1,500 staff by 1940. A third major installation, Unit 8604, operates in Guangzhou under the Southern China Expeditionary Army from 1939 until the city's evacuation in 1945. Together, the three units form a network capable of supporting biological warfare operations across the entire China theater. Communication records show regular coordination. Pingfang develops agents and protocols. Nanjing and Guangzhou conduct regional trials and adapt methods to local conditions. Delivery systems require testing. A report submitted to the Army General Staff in Tokyo in 1940 describes field verification exercises conducted in rural Manchukuo. Aircraft release test munitions over uninhabited areas. Ground teams measure dispersal patterns, agent survival rates, and environmental persistence. The exercises confirm that aerial dispersal is feasible but highlight difficulties. Wind unpredictability, temperature effects, and the challenge of achieving concentrated dosing over a target area. Operational records, reconstructed from trial testimony and Chinese investigative reports, indicate that by late 1940, Unit 731 leadership concludes that laboratory and remote testing have reached their limits. Further development requires live trials under combat conditions, against actual civilian and military populations in areas beyond Japanese control. Authorization for operational use comes from high levels. While no single order document has been recovered, the pattern of activity in 1940 and 1941 indicates approval by the Army General Staff and acquiescence, if not active support, from senior commanders in China. Biological warfare is treated as a special capability, used selectively rather than as a routine weapon. The first confirmed large-scale attack occurs in October 1940. City air raid records from Ningbo, Zhejiang province. Note an alert on the morning of October 27th. A single Japanese aircraft appears over the Kaiming Street district. Eyewitnesses later report unusual behavior. The plane flies low, releases no visible bombs, and drops unidentified material described as grain mixed with cloth scraps or paper. No explosions occur. The aircraft departs after a single pass. Within 10 days, cases of bubonic plague appear in neighborhoods directly beneath the flight path. The disease, which had not been reported in Ningbo for years, spreads rapidly. Municipal health authorities impose a quarantine, erecting barriers around affected streets and forcibly relocating residents. Records from the Ningbo Municipal Health Bureau, preserved and later analyzed by Chinese researchers, document the outbreak's progression. 11 cases on November 5th, 41 cases by November 15th, peak incidence in late November. Total casualties from the Ningbo incident are documented in overlapping sources. The Health Bureau's epidemic report lists 112 confirmed plague deaths in the immediate outbreak. A broader municipal tally, accounting for secondary transmission and deaths from related causes, reaches approximately 1,554 fatalities by year's end. The Ningbo municipal government orders the construction of a wall around the most heavily affected area, later known locally as the plague field, and conducts controlled burns to eliminate contamination. Post-war investigations by Chinese authorities, combined with testimony at the Khabarovsk trial and Japanese academic publications in the 1950s and 1960s, established that the Ningbo attack involved cooperation between Unit 731 and Unit 1644. Infected fleas, bred and cultured at Pingfang and Nanjing, were packed into ceramic containers and dispersed from a Type 96 bomber. The operation serves as a proof of concept. Aerial biological attack can produce significant civilian casualties and disrupt local administration. Evaluations of the Ningbo operation, referenced in trial testimony, classify it as a limited success. The death toll meets expectations, but the disease fails to spread beyond the initial target zone due to rapid Chinese containment measures. Internal recommendations emphasize the need for larger-scale operations, multiple simultaneous strikes, or attacks on populations with less capacity for medical response. The pattern repeats in other cities during 1940 and 1941. Scholarly research identifies probable biological attacks in Suzhou, Zhejiang province, in September 1941, resulting in an estimated 3,800 fatalities. In Changde, Hunan province, in November 1941, with at least 7,000 deaths recorded, and in several smaller towns along rail and river routes in central China. Each incident follows a similar sequence. Unexplained aerial activity, sudden disease outbreaks in previously unaffected areas, and casualty figures disproportionate to normal epidemic patterns. Chinese authorities and local populations recognize the pattern but lack the evidence or international platform to pursue formal accusations during wartime. Reports reach nationalist headquarters in Chongqing, but intelligence assessments remain inconclusive. Allied military observers note the incidents but treat them as possible epidemic outbreaks exacerbated by wartime conditions rather than deliberate attacks. Not until post-war investigations do researchers establish the connections between Japanese unit activities, aircraft movements, and epidemic timing. The largest and most thoroughly documented biological warfare operation occurs in 1942 during the Zhejiang campaign. The campaign's conventional objective is to destroy airbases in eastern China suspected of hosting United States Army Air Forces aircraft involved in the Doolittle raid on Tokyo in April 1942. Operational orders issued to Japanese divisions include both conventional combat directives and references to special operational methods to be employed in rear areas. Unit 731 and associated units are tasked with contaminating water supplies, grain stores, and other resources along the campaign route. Methods include injecting bacteria into wells, distributing contaminated food to civilians, and releasing infected vectors in villages and towns. The objective is to create epidemic conditions that will hinder Chinese military operations, disrupt logistics, and weaken civilian support for resistance. The scale of the biological effort is unprecedented. A report fragment from Unit 1644, introduced at Khabarovsk, describes operations in at least 17 towns and villages across Zhejiang and Jiangxi provinces between May and August 1942. Agents deployed include cholera, typhoid, plague, dysentery, and anthrax, targeting water sources, food supplies, and direct contamination of buildings and pathways. Chinese casualty estimates from the Zhejiang-Jiangxi campaign remain contested. Provincial health records, compiled post-war, attribute tens of thousands of civilian deaths to disease outbreaks during and immediately after the campaign. Conservative scholarly assessments place the figure between 40,000 and 60,000 fatalities directly linked to epidemics in areas of Japanese biological operations. Some Chinese researchers argue for higher totals, exceeding 100,000, when accounting for longer-term mortality and secondary spread. The campaign also produces an unexpected outcome: Japanese casualties. Trial testimony and post-war memoirs indicate that approximately 1,700 Japanese soldiers die from diseases, primarily cholera and dysentery, contracted during the Zhejiang-Jiangxi operations. The agents, once released, proved difficult to contain. Japanese field sanitation, while superior to Chinese civilian conditions, cannot fully prevent transmission. Medical units report outbreaks within Japanese formations, forcing evacuations and reducing combat effectiveness. An assessment prepared by Unit 731 staff in late 1942, referenced at Khabarovsk, acknowledges the problem. The report states that biological agents demonstrate significant offensive potential, but also uncontrolled secondary effects that complicate military operations. Recommendations include improved preventive measures for Japanese personnel and more selective targeting of enemy-controlled areas where Japanese troops will not subsequently operate. The Zhejiang-Jiangxi campaign marks the high point of Japan's operational biological warfare activity. Subsequent operations continue, but on a smaller scale. Factors include the difficulty of controlling disease spread, the limited tactical impact relative to conventional weapons, and growing concerns about Allied retaliation if biological use becomes widely known. By 1943, Japan's biological warfare network is fully established. Unit 731 at Pingfang remains the central research and production facility. Unit 1644 in Nanjing and Unit 8604 in Guangzhou support regional operations. Smaller detachments operate in Manchukuo, northern China, and Southeast Asia. Total personnel across the network exceed 5,000. An organizational chart prepared for the Army General Staff in Tokyo in 1943, recovered post-war, lists biological warfare units alongside conventional medical, engineer, and logistics formations. The chart places Unit 731 under the direct authority of the Guangdong Army Commander, with operational coordination through the Medical Affairs Bureau at Army General Headquarters. The structure indicates that biological warfare is treated as an established, if specialized, component of Japanese military capability. Allied intelligence during the war remains fragmentary. Chinese nationalist authorities compile reports of suspected biological attacks and forward them to United States and British liaison officers. Some captured Japanese documents mention epidemic prevention units, but the terminology is ambiguous. Interrogations of Japanese prisoners of war yield occasional references to special medical units in Manchuria, but few details. By 1944, senior Allied intelligence officers are aware of rumors regarding Japanese human experimentation and possible biological weapons. An Office of Strategic Services report from mid-1944 notes unconfirmed accounts of bacteriological research involving prisoners in Manchuria. The report treats the information as plausible but unverified, filing it alongside many other wartime intelligence fragments that cannot be confirmed or acted upon. Japanese assessments of their own biological warfare program as recorded in staff studies and post-war testimony, reflect mixed conclusions. The program demonstrates that large-scale biological attacks are feasible and can produce significant casualties. However, the difficulty of controlling disease spread, the limited immediate tactical value, the risk of friendly casualties, and the potential for Allied retaliation constrain operational use. A planning document from 1945, referenced at Khabarovsk, discusses scenarios for large-scale biological strikes against United States forces in the Pacific. Proposed targets include American bases in the Mariana Islands and Okinawa. The plan envisions using aircraft to disperse plague-infected fleas over airfields and supply depots. The document is never implemented. Japan's deteriorating military position, combined with logistical challenges and fear of retaliation, prevent the operation from advancing beyond the planning stage. When Soviet forces launched their invasion of Manchuria on August 9, 1945, Unit 731 remains operational. The facility at Pingfang continues research and production activities until the final days of the war. Personnel rosters indicate full staffing as late as August 10. But events are moving rapidly. Within 72 hours, the unit will begin a frantic effort to erase all evidence of its existence. Radio broadcasts from Tokyo reach Pingfang on the afternoon of August 15, 1945. Emperor Hirohito announces Japan's acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration. The war is over. For the personnel of Unit 731, the announcement brings not relief but immediate crisis. The Soviet Army, which crossed the Manchukuo border 6 days earlier, is advancing rapidly toward Harbin. Within 48 hours, Soviet units will reach Pingfang. Orders arrive from Guangdong Army Headquarters. Destroy all evidence, eliminate witnesses, evacuate personnel. Ishii and senior officers begin executing a demolition plan prepared months earlier in anticipation of possible Soviet invasion. The plan is methodical and comprehensive. Nothing that could prove the unit's actual activities must remain intact. Demolition teams place explosive charges in key buildings. Priority targets include the main laboratory complex, the pathogen production facilities, and Building 7, which houses the holding cells. Engineers disconnect utilities, drain storage tanks, and prepare incendiary devices. A separate team begins burning documents. Stacks of files, experimental records, prisoner logs, operational reports are fed into furnaces and outdoor fire pits. The process continues around the clock for 3 days. Trial testimony from demolition crew members, given at Khabarovsk, describes the systematic destruction. Boilers are wrecked with sledgehammers. Microscopes, centrifuges, and incubators are smashed. Glass containers holding biological cultures are broken and contents incinerated. Refrigeration units are disabled. The power plant is partially dismantled. Explosions begin on the night of August 14th and continue through August 16th. The question of prisoners remains. Post-war investigations find no credible evidence of prisoners liberated alive from Pingfang when Soviet forces arrive. Trial testimony suggests 2 possible explanations. Prisoners are killed during the evacuation, or the facility has no inmates at the time of demolition due to prior disposal. Exact details are never conclusively established, but the absence of survivors speaks to deliberate elimination. Some personnel evacuate by train to Korea, intending to reach Japan before Soviet forces cut the rail line. Others flee south into China, attempting to blend into the general Japanese military withdrawal. Ishii and core leadership, including division heads and senior researchers, prioritize destroying evidence over personal escape. They remain at Pingfang until the demolition is complete, then depart on one of the last trains out of Harbin on August 17th. Soviet advance units reach Pingfang on August 19th. They find a ruined compound. Buildings are collapsed or gutted by fire. Equipment is destroyed. Scattered papers and partially burned documents lie in courtyards. Crematoria are still warm. The scene confirms the site's purpose. No legitimate medical facility would require such frantic destruction, but the demolition has succeeded in eliminating most direct evidence. Soviet military intelligence begins immediate investigation. Engineers survey the ruins, cataloging structures, and attempting to reconstruct the facility's layout. A team of medical officers collects samples from contaminated areas and examines equipment fragments. Interrogations of captured Japanese personnel yield limited information. Most low-ranking soldiers assigned to guard or logistics duties know only that the facility conducted epidemic prevention research. Over the following months, Soviet investigators pieced together the story. Captured documents, though fragmentary, include procurement records, personnel rosters, and partial experimental reports. Local Chinese civilians provide testimony about prisoner transports and rumors of human experimentation. A few Japanese medical officers, captured during the evacuation, eventually cooperate with interrogators, confirming the facility's role in biological warfare research and human experimentation. Soviet authorities compile a preliminary report by late 1945. The document, classified at the time, concludes that Unit 731 conducted large-scale research on biological weapons, used thousands of prisoners in lethal experiments, and participated in biological attacks against Chinese civilians. The report recommends war crimes prosecution. Meanwhile, American occupation authorities in Japan begin their own investigation. In September 1945, Counterintelligence Corps officers receive reports that a Japanese biological warfare program operated in Manchuria. The reports are vague but persistent. Intelligence staff at General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters assign the matter low priority. The focus is on conventional war crimes, demobilization, and political restructuring. Ishii and other Unit 731 personnel reach Japan successfully. They adopt false identities, disperse to different regions, and avoid contact with occupation authorities. Ishii assumes a pseudonym and lives quietly in Tokyo, supported by relatives and former colleagues. For more than a year, American investigators are unaware of his location or even his exact role in the biological warfare program. The situation changes in January 1947. An American intelligence officer at General Headquarters receives a detailed tip from a Japanese informant. Ishii Shiro, former commander of a secret biological warfare unit in Manchuria, is living under an alias in Tokyo and possesses extensive records of human experimentation. The informant provides an address. Ishii is located and brought in for questioning. Initial interrogations are cautious. He admits leading a military medical unit in Manchuria but claims its work focused on epidemic prevention and water purification. Standard defensive medicine. Interrogators press for details. Over several sessions, Ishii gradually reveals more, carefully gauging American interest and intentions. By mid-1947, American investigators understand that Ishii and his subordinates possess data from years of human experimentation, data that cannot be obtained ethically through conventional research. The material includes detailed mortality studies, dose-response information for biological agents, environmental tolerance data, and field test results. A report from the Army's Chemical Corps, forwarded to Washington, assesses the information as of significant value to the United States biological warfare program. Strategic considerations enter the discussion. United States-Soviet relations are deteriorating into Cold War. If the Soviets gain exclusive access to Unit 731's research through trials or interrogations, they will acquire a potential military advantage. Denying the Soviets this information becomes a priority. In March 1947, a memorandum from the Army's G2 Intelligence Division recommends securing Ishii's cooperation. The memo suggests that detailed technical information can be obtained if Ishii and his colleagues are assured their statements will be used solely for intelligence purposes and not as evidence in war crimes prosecutions. The proposal stops short of explicit immunity but implies it. Negotiations proceed quietly. Ishii and approximately 20 former Unit 731 officers agree to provide full technical reports, experimental data, and operational details in exchange for assurances that the information will not be shared with other Allied powers and will not be used in criminal proceedings. The agreement is never formalized in writing. No signed immunity deal exists in declassified records, but the understanding is clear and is honored. Over the next year, American interrogators conduct extensive debriefings. The former Unit 731 personnel provide thousands of pages of reports, drawings, and data summaries. Topics include bacterial culture methods, munitions design, field test results, and human experimental protocols. The material is classified top secret and restricted to a small group of chemical corps and intelligence officers. None of it is shared with allied prosecutors or tribunals. The International Military Tribunal for the Far East, convened in Tokyo in May 1946, proceeds without significant attention to biological warfare. Prosecutors focus on conventional war crimes, atrocities against prisoners of war and civilians, and Japan's aggressive wars. The tribunal's charter includes provisions for prosecuting the use of prohibited weapons, but no specific biological warfare charges appear in the final indictments of major defendants. Several factors explain the omission. Soviet prosecutors at the Tokyo Tribunal push for inclusion of biological warfare crimes but face resistance from American and British colleagues, who argue the evidence is insufficient. Behind the scenes, American intelligence officers work to keep Unit 731 information compartmentalized, preventing its disclosure to prosecutors who might feel compelled to act on it. The tribunal proceeds with no mention of ping-pong, Ishii, or the biological warfare network. While the Tokyo Tribunal ignores biological warfare, the Soviets prepare their own prosecution. In December 1949, a military tribunal convenes in Khabarovsk, in the Soviet Far East. 12 defendants appear, all former members of Japanese biological warfare units. Officers from Unit 731, Unit 100, and related formations. Charges include developing and employing bacteriological weapons, conducting lethal human experimentation, and violating the laws and customs of war. The trial lasts 5 days, from December 25 to December 31, 1949. Prosecutors present documentary evidence recovered from ping-pong, testimony from Chinese witnesses, and confessions from the defendants themselves. The proceedings are public. Soviet and international press attend. Transcripts are published in Russian and later translated into multiple languages. Defendants describe the structure and operations of Unit 731 in considerable detail. Major General Kawashima Kiyoshi, former deputy commander, testifies about human experimentation protocols. Lieutenant Colonel Nishino Kanji describes field trials of biological agents. Testimonies cover the production of plague, cholera, and typhoid cultures, the use of prisoners in frostbite and pressure experiments, and the contamination of water supplies during the Zhejiang Jiangxi campaign. Western governments and media initially dismissed Khabarovsk as a propaganda show trial. The timing, 4 years after the war, amid rising Cold War tensions, appears politically motivated. American officials privately note that defendants' testimony aligns closely with information obtained from Ishii and his colleagues, suggesting the Soviet evidence is credible. Publicly, however, the United States government takes no position, and Western press coverage is skeptical. The tribunal sentences the defendants to terms ranging from 2 years to 25 years in Soviet labor camps. Most serve their full terms and are repatriated to Japan in the mid-1950s. None face additional prosecution in Japan. Ishii and other senior Unit 731 officers never stand trial. Ishii lives quietly in Tokyo, occasionally consulting for pharmaceutical companies and maintaining contact with former colleagues. He dies in 1959 of throat cancer, at age 67, without ever facing criminal charges. His obituary in Japanese newspapers describes him as a former Army medical officer and makes no mention of biological warfare or Unit 731. By the early 1950s, United States intelligence has fully exploited the Unit 731 material. Reports are integrated into chemical core planning and research. Some information influences American biological warfare programs during the Korean War, though specific applications remain classified. The strategic decision to grant immunity, never officially acknowledged, achieves its objective: denial of information to the Soviets and acquisition of data for American programs. The cost of that decision is measured in justice foregone. Hundreds of thousands of victims, Chinese civilians, prisoners of war, experimental subjects, receive no legal redress. Perpetrators escape accountability. The exchange of data for immunity establishes a Cold War precedent. Military utility can outweigh legal and moral obligations when national security is invoked. Decades pass before the full scope of Japan's biological warfare program emerges into public view. During the 1950s and 1960s, the subject remains obscure. Japanese government records stay classified. American intelligence maintains strict compartmentalization of Unit 731 material. Soviet publications of the Khabarovsk trial are dismissed in the West as propaganda. Survivors and victims in China lack the international platform to press their accounts. The first significant public disclosure occurs in 1981, when Japanese journalist Morimura Seiichi publishes The Devil's Gluttony, a book-length investigation of Unit 731 based on interviews with former personnel. The work is controversial. Critics question the accuracy of some details, but it breaks the silence in Japan and prompts renewed scholarly attention. Archival openings follow. In 1993, the Japanese government releases portions of wartime military records. Documents confirming the existence of Unit 731, its command structure, and its operations in China become accessible to researchers. American declassification of intelligence files related to Unit 731 begins in the 1990s, revealing the extent of post-war cooperation with Ishii and the deliberate decision to shield him from prosecution. Chinese archives, opened gradually from the 1980s onward, provide detailed local records of disease outbreaks linked to Japanese biological warfare operations. Provincial health reports, municipal quarantine logs, and victim registries allow researchers to reconstruct casualty figures with increasing precision. Modern scholarly estimates, synthesizing Japanese, American, Chinese, and Soviet sources, place the total death toll from Japan's biological warfare program in the range of 200,000 to 300,000 individuals. This figure includes multiple categories: prisoners who die in experimentation at Pingfang and other facilities, civilians killed in direct biological attacks such as Ningbo, Changde, and Zhejiang Jiangxi operations, and secondary deaths from epidemics initiated by Japanese contamination of water and food supplies. The breakdown by category remains approximate. Conservative estimates attribute at least 3,000 to 10,000 deaths to human experimentation within Unit 731 and associated facilities. Documented biological attacks account for approximately 40,000 to 100,000 deaths based on Chinese municipal and provincial health records. Secondary epidemic spread, more difficult to quantify precisely, likely adds another 100,000 to 200,000 fatalities. Scholars also reevaluate the scientific and military value of the data obtained. Analysis of declassified reports reveals that much of Unit 731's experimental work violates basic methodological standards. Control groups are inadequate or absent. Sample sizes are small and unrepresentative. Environmental variables are poorly controlled. Record keeping is inconsistent. The data, while detailed, adds limited genuine scientific knowledge beyond what could be inferred from existing research or obtained through ethical means. Military utility is similarly questioned. Post-war assessments by American biological warfare experts, working from the Ishii material, conclude that the Japanese program's findings confirm general principles but provide few operational breakthroughs. The difficulty of controlling biological agents after release, the unpredictability of disease spread, and the risk of friendly casualties, problems evident in the Zhejiang Jiangxi campaign, remain unsolved. The data does not justify the crimes committed to obtain it, even by narrow military criteria. Legal efforts to address Unit 731's legacy begin in the 1990s. Survivors and relatives of victims file lawsuits in Japanese courts seeking official acknowledgement and compensation. In August 2002, Tokyo District Court issues a landmark ruling. The court finds that Japan conducted biological warfare in China, used human subjects in lethal experimentation, and violated international law. However, the court denies compensation claims, ruling that individuals have no standing to sue the state for wartime acts under existing treaties. The ruling represents partial progress. Official acknowledgement of biological warfare occurs, but legal remedies remain unavailable. Subsequent appeals fail. Japanese government statements stop short of formal apology, offering expressions of remorse for wartime suffering without specific admission of state responsibility for Unit 731's crimes. Memory and education efforts proceed unevenly. In China, Museums in Harbin and Ningbo document Unit 731's activities, displaying artifacts, survivor testimony, and historical records. The sites attract domestic and international visitors, keeping the history visible. In Japan, textbook coverage remains limited and contentious. Some editions mention biological warfare briefly, others omit it entirely. Debates over historical memory and national identity complicate efforts to incorporate Unit 731 into mainstream Japanese historical education. International recognition gradually expands. In 2017, declassified United States documents confirmed the full extent of American immunity arrangements with Ishii and his subordinates. The revelations prompt renewed criticism of Cold War-era decisions that prioritized intelligence acquisition over justice. No government reverses those decisions or acknowledges formal error, but historical consensus solidifies. The immunity deal was legally indefensible and morally indefensible, justified solely by Cold War strategic calculations. The numerical contrasts remain stark. 12 officers tried at Khabarovsk, all released by the mid-1950s. No prosecutions at the Tokyo Tribunal. No trials in Japan. Ishii and the majority of Unit 731's senior personnel live freely, many resuming professional careers in medicine, academia, and industry. Against those numbers, estimated 200,000 to 300,000 deaths. Thousands of prisoners subjected to lethal experimentation. Tens of thousands of civilians killed in biological attacks. Hundreds of thousands more affected by disease outbreaks, forced quarantines, and community destruction. The Unit 731 story illustrates the tension between justice and Cold War strategy. The decision to grant immunity rested on assessments of military utility and denial of intelligence to adversaries. Those assessments, in hindsight, appear exaggerated. The data obtained was less valuable than claimed. But even if the data had been invaluable, the ethical calculation remains troubling. Can mass atrocities be excused or ignored when the perpetrators possess useful information? No formal answer has been given. The immunity arrangements, never officially announced, were never officially defended or rescinded. They stand as historical facts, documented in declassified files, analyzed by scholars, but never adjudicated or explained in public legal or moral terms by the governments that made them. Survivors and descendants continue seeking recognition. Activist groups in China and Japan document individual victim stories, compile name lists, and press for fuller historical accounting. Memorials, museums, and annual commemorations keep the history present, ensuring that Unit 731's crimes are not erased by time or political convenience. The final numbers tell the story in outline. Unit 731 operated from 1936 to 1945, 9 years. The facility at Pingfang covered approximately 1 square kilometer and employed roughly 3,000 personnel. Associated units across China added another 2,000 personnel. Together, they produced a death toll in the hundreds of thousands. In exchange, 12 men faced trial. None were executed. Sentences averaged 10 years. The chief architect of the program, Shiro Ishii, died free at age 67. By the time most former Unit 731 officers had resumed civilian lives, the known death toll from Japan's biological warfare program had reached into the hundreds of thousands. Surviving documents show not only how that system operated, but how, in the Cold War's first decade, its results were judged more valuable than the trials that never occurred.